Glad to be here, Chris. Thank you, and welcome everyone out in Zoom land. Topic today, as Chris mentioned, was some favorite tools, and I am standing here next to this very peculiar tool. I'm sure most of you are a lot brighter than I am. I never would have figured out what this tool was or how it was used if I didn't ask someone and had it shown to me. But it's one of those tools that once you use it, you will truly, truly value it. I know the first time I used it, it was true love. This is a weed wrench. Now the original company, the original person making these called this product a weed wrench, and that was the name of his company. That business has gone out of business. The name is now owned by another company, but if you searched online just under weed wrench, you'd come up with 3 or more companies making comparable tools. The forestry department sometimes calls this a privet puller, and there's other names as well. This is for pulling out weed trees and other woody plants. Most of us have at times done something that's a real waste of time. I guess there's some value in doing that. We all eventually have the weed tree and unwanted tree seedling come up in the garden, and we'll cut it to the ground and only have to do that, again 6 months later. So instead of cutting things to the ground, a tool like this will pull it out of the ground. Now I'm going to demonstrate several times to show you how this works and hopefully not make a fool of myself and impress you with the value of this tool. This is the kind of tool that probably isn't something that every homeowner needs to own, because if you've been keeping up with your garden, you don't have an abundance of things that would need this kind of tool. This is the kind of tool to borrow from somebody who owns it. I have a lot of true friends who invite me over to their garden, provided I bring this with me. It's a little bit like owning a pickup truck or a swimming pool. It's amazing the friends you garner that way. All right, I'm going to start off on this little privet. And I should say we had to escape the Arboretum because we're keeping up with the maintenance of the Arboretum fairly well. And so we escaped to another location where there are quite a few unwanted woody plants. This is the common privet, the Chinese privet. It's one of our worst invasive exotics because it comes up everywhere. It will totally dominate the shrub layer in woodlands and such. And like so many of our weedy, exotic woody plants, it has a fruit that the birds love. They eat the fruit. They're nourished by the fruit, but then they fly off and poop the seeds from the fruit here and there, and so they get spread around that way. And I should explain the term exotic when I use the phrase invasive exotic. Exotic is merely, in this use, the opposite of native. So a plant is either native to a site, or if it's from another part of the planet, it's an exotic plant. Exotic is a term that's used many different ways, but when we talk about invasive exotics, it's a plant that's not native. So you can see where it gets the name weed wrench. This is really a big wrench down here, soldered onto this tall bar, which gives you the the strength of a fulcrum. I'm not the most powerful person in the world, and this is just a little privet, but I should get on the other side. So you put the open wrench around the base of the trunk. You have to stand on this end initially to keep it down at ground level as low as possible, and then you pull it backwards. And I need to move around. And then when you initially start pulling down, And then you pull it out of the ground. And this is just a little privet. Might have been able to pull it out without the weed wrench, but I thought it was a good one to demonstrate on. Though I must say, I have a decent back, but one thing that will hurt my back is trying to pull something out of the ground by bending over and pull it out. So the weed wrench saves my back a bunch of times. But it also, you know, when you're able to remove the entire plant and it can't possibly regrow, well then you're not coming back 6 months later to cut it down again. Now back here underneath, we have a hedge of great big green giant arborvitae. There's this little willow oak that's come up and it's sort of bent over, I guess sort of growing outwards towards the sun, but I think I can get fairly close to the base of the trunk. It looks like maybe some soil was pushed up over the base of the tree, but we'll try here. All right, we have a lot of obstacles here. Oh, I see. Sort of pulling the tree upwards so I can get a good grasp of it with the weed wrench. Let's see. I think we're making progress on this. Oh, I see. The whole tree's been pushed over at one time, so it's a very difficult example of something we might pull out. But let me give it another try. Now that I've pulled it a little bit more upright with the weed wrench and I'm able to get down lower, I might be able to pull it out the rest of the way. There we go. Let's try it this time. Okay, well, Lordy, look at that. It's the thing's laid down a whole lot further. But, oh Lordy, look at that. The tree is coming from all the way over here. Well, this is a poor example. Let me go on. There's some nice fat privets over here that might be a far better example. Actually, if you don't mind, I'm going to take a few steps further this way for privet that's not as far in the tree. I mean, far into the arborvitaes. Here's a good sized one. Let's see if we can get this out of the ground. Okay. All right, we've gotten the crown of the plant out of the ground. So I'm going to pull it the opposite direction now. All right, well, it's pretty much out of the ground. What I'm going to do at this point is just cut off the few roots that are holding it in place with my pruning shears. Well, actually, it's coming out quite readily. Oh, okay. All right. Now, that is one good size privet's eliminated. There's a lot more in this area that would need to be eliminated, but this is a good start.
That's twice Doug's height.
It's a lot taller than I realized, but it also came out much easier than I thought. You can hear that I'm a little bit winded, but I really didn't work that hard. And this is now a dead privet, soon to be dead. It'll go to the compost facility where it'll get run through a big chipper, and it'll never produce more seed and offspring taking over our woodlands. And I've used the weed wrench on taprooted things like oak trees and pecans, seedling pecans, and pulled out, 2 feet of taproot. So, find somebody who owns one, borrow it from them, and eliminate the trees that you need to eliminate and be done with them once and for all. I think that might be enough on this particular tool.
Well, that could be good, Doug. Just a couple of comments in the online chat. We have Annabelle, who said that she's removed acres of Elaeagnus with it, so she gives it a definite thumbs up as well.
Great.
And Rick said that he's actually bare rooted some trees with that one. He just put some foam around the trunk. If he's been successful, great, but don't forget you can do some significant damage to the trunk if you are trying to transplant them with this tool. You may have noticed on the one that Doug did, there is very significant damage on the trunk all the way around it. So it may not be all that good for that particular plant.
And if somebody was using it for transplanting a plant they want to move from one location to another and keep alive, wrapping it around would be good so you don't end up skinning the bark off as I did. Of course, it's no concern to me since I'm trying to kill this plant. But the other thing is, once you start loosening up, when I bare root plants to transplant, I start sort of following the roots out as far as I can, so I preserve as much root as possible. So the weed wrench might be a good way to start that process, but I think you're going to need to do a lot of digging to, save as much root as possible.
We do have an online question for this one, Doug, from Suzanne. She was wondering if there is a similar tool to remove palms that don't have trunks, and I think that would apply to all herbaceous things. And I would think definitely that that crimper part would just squish the plant, and that wouldn't work out very well for anything like that, just a shovel.
No, you know, back where I started this afternoon, there were some of the dry stems of pokeweed. And pokeweed makes huge roots underground, but you'd never get them out of the ground by using a tool like this on the stems because the stems are much too soft.
Okay.
And, you know, our native dwarf palmetto, it's described as not having an above ground trunk but developing a trunk underground. You know, someday maybe we should do a demonstration or at least show a big one to show what we mean by the underground trunk. I'm sure you wouldn't be able to pull that out of the ground by using the weed wrench on
Those
the
are hard
top.
to pull out of the ground with a shovel.
They are really hard. I dug a decent sized one last week and didn't have much fun doing it.
I had some of the sable miners in a pot, and the underground trunk actually grew through the pots. I don't know how they broke a hole, but they were quite successful. But we do have a really good question on here, Doug, that at least I thought was very good. Bruce was wondering, how does this work in small spaces? Do you think this is a tool that you could maneuver quite well in relatively small space? I know
Yes.
we used it in the perennial border last year with pretty
Yes.
good success, and
Yeah.
you were rather cramped over there.
Well, the only thing that takes up much room is when you're starting to pull the fulcrum part back. But no, it's good. It's real common to get a weed tree seedling like in a large shrub, like a quince or something like that. And often you can pull the weed tree out of the crown of the shrub without disturbing the shrub all that much. So I think it works quite well in confined quarters.
Okay, great. And there was one more question. I think we'll stop with this question for this particular tool. Lynn was wondering, does this one work for removing bamboo?
It wouldn't work well. If you're talking about one of the running bamboos like the Phylostachys, it wouldn't work really well because you might be able to get out some of the rhizome by pulling on a cane, but then the rest of the rhizome's underground. You know, you might be able to use it, you know, you pull the rhizome out of the ground just so far and then you move the weed wrench and continue pulling it out that way. It might work. I've never tried it on bamboo.
Give it a try. Well, there's your task for this winter, right?
What?
I said, there's your task for this winter.
Oh, I thought you were going to do that for us, Chris.
Sure.
I was foolish enough 40 years ago to plant black bamboo thinking I'd keep up with it. But, you know, the best thing is to never plant one of those tall spreading bamboos unless you have, you know, many, many acres of land to let it run around in.
Plans like that never work out real well. Well, that sounds great. Thanks for the introduction to the weed wrench, Doug. And we're going to take a slightly different track. I didn't announce it because I wanted it to be a surprise, but we do have a few guest surprise speakers here today. We have Bree Arthur, who has brought two of her very famous neighbors. We have Aiden and Abby over here to talk about some of their favorite tools as well. Of course, we all know Bree Arthur from all of her social media and her speaking engagements and her books. And we're quite happy to have her here. And you probably recognize Aiden and Abby. They're former next-door neighbors. Bree has since bought their house when they moved away and is doing some great projects over there. And I know firsthand how much work Aiden and Abby have done at Bree's house over the years. It's been quite impressive. And I visited Bree's open house this past spring. And the hardest person working out there, the most hardest working person out there was Aiden on Saturday. So kudos to Aiden. Boy, I think he was helping 20 people at one time out there. It was very impressive. So good job, Aiden. But I thought we'd have them to talk about their favorite garden tools as well, because we know that they have some good favorites.
Well, thanks for inviting us, you guys. This is a fun surprise. And we wanted to bring just some really practical, everyday, almost everyday tools that we use on a regular basis. And first, we have a brand new to me. I actually just got this last Friday when we were at a trade show. And this is a soil scoop. And I don't know how I've lived without it, but since getting it on Friday, I've probably used it 100 times. And this is mainly for using with potting soil or soil cube, my favorite compost. And you can just scoop the soil in and then put it into your container or put it out into your garden. And this is just really practical, sturdy plastic, good handle. Another one of my favorite tools, which I've actually just bought, is this folding saw from Corona. And I have really been using this for a lot of things. In fact, yesterday I was trimming my townhouse crepe myrtle. All the lower branches that were crossing, I just got in there and cleaned it up. But I really bought this for the reason of cutting down my castor beans after the first hard frost. You know, they're practically impossible to pull out, so I just cut them flush to the ground, and then over the winter, the root system will slowly rot in place and I don't disturb the soil. So I use this folding saw for a lot of things, but especially for cutting down big, bold, annual plants like castor beans. Now, Abby, do you have your microphone on? Let's turn this on. Okay, now you're mic'd. So Abby has been gardening now for what, 7 years? It's practically a full-time job. They've actually just came from their first college class. They sat in on Horticulture 101 over in Kilgore Hall, taught by the amazing Dr. Brian Jackson. And tell everybody what your favorite tool is.
I like the gloves because they protect your hands when you're gardening or doing anything. And you can also use your phone while you have the gloves on.
Let's face it, using your phone is important. You might want to take a picture of something that you've just done, and you can keep these Atlas gloves on and still use your touchscreen telephone, which I think is certainly something that's valid. Now, Aiden, you said you didn't want to talk, so he kept his mask on. So come over here though, and first show off what you have in your hand here.
Groundhog.
This is the groundhog. It's also called a hand mattock. And I started using this like 20 some years ago. Nancy Goodwin at Montrose introduced me to this tool. And it's just a fantastic way to be able to dig small holes, but also to weed. So that question about digging out herbaceous things, this is my go-to for digging out smaller herbaceous plants. It's just an altogether fantastic thing. You can find hand tillers like this online, but if you want the groundhog specifically, you have to go to Agri Supply over on Highway 70 in Garner. They're the only place that carries this. And I've had this one for, I think, 15 years. So I can tell you they do last a good long time. And then our last favorite tool that gets used constantly, and actually you can pull the holster too. You can tell none of my stuff is very new. I use my Akatsun pruners and my Corona holster. They go hand in hand. The reason that I like these Akatsun pruners is because my hands are really small, and like Felco pruners are too big. It makes my hands hurt to use those. So these Akatsuns are perfect for people like me with small hands, and they have really easy to sharpen blades, so you can use them for years and years. In fact, I think I've been using these for more than a decade. And every now and again, I think I may have lost them, and I have backup pairs, don't worry. But then miraculously, they always show back up. And in part, I think it's because they have the white handle, because you actually see white if you have this, sitting down on the ground. And that's an important thing to recognize with tools as well. Make it so that they're not too invisible. Whenever I have tools that have just wooden handles, I'll always make sure that I spray paint them, because otherwise I won't notice them and I'll lose them out in my garden. Also, spray painting them will prevent other people from borrowing your tools and claiming them that they're theirs. Also spoken from experience. So I hope that our little tool selection here is helpful for all of you. And thanks so much for letting us crash your midweek event here at the Arboretum.
Hey, that's a good way to call it.
Good
I like
to
it,
see you.
Thank you for crashing. I appreciate it. I'm so glad you could join us today. That was a lot of fun. Thank you, Aiden. Thank you, Abby, for coming in today. It's always fun seeing you both in all of Bree's programming. It's always nice to see really cool neighbors getting together and having some fun out in the garden. I think she talks about you making the potatoes or French fries every single time.
Is there time to add more?
Yeah, we could definitely talk about more. We've only done a half hour or so far, so definitely time for more.
Well, and some of my additional tools tie in really well with Bree's and Abby's and Aiden's. I too, let me just figure out which tool is in which pocket. I too am a big fan of folding saw. Generally, the one I carry with me most of the time is the smaller size because it fits real nicely in my back pocket. And of course, you know, pruning shears are essential, but you get to a point where you need a bigger tool for a thicker stem. And traditionally, what somebody would use when something was too big for a pair of hand shears was a lopper, which is just merely the same cutting blade on longer handles, so you have the power of two, you know, both of your arms making the cut rather than one hand. But a little pruning saw will handle the same things that loppers handle, and because this is in my back pocket, I always know where it is when I'm, you know, spending the day or that hour pruning, whereas a pair of loppers might do most of my pruning with the hand shears, and occasionally I do prune these microphone wires. But you know, if I was using hand shears and a pair of loppers, well, when I'm using the hand shears, the loppers are put down on the ground, and I go on to the next bush, and I go on to the tree after that, and then when I finally need the pair of loppers, I have to go look for them and find them again, whereas the folding saw is always in my hand. So I don't even own a pair of loppers now. You know, my two main pruning tools are hand shears and a pruning saw, and of course also a bigger saw like the one Bree showed for bigger cuts. Another favorite tool is the weeding knife. It's based on the original Japanese hori-hori knife, which comes with a wooden handle. And I like the wooden handle better. It's a little bit more comfortable to use, but like Bree said, you want, you know, tools that are brightly colored, so when you drop them on the ground, you can find them. The brown wooden handle just sort of blends in with the mulch or the leaf litter. And of course, we certainly could do what Bree suggested, which was a great suggestion, was to spray paint a wooden handle. But I just buy these ones with brightly colored plastic handles. But this is a multi-purpose tool. You know, you can use it for weeding, pry a weed out. You can use it for planting. This is a super sturdy blade. You see, I don't know, what is that, at least an 1/8 inch of solid steel. I once gave a bunch of gardeners their own weeding knife and said, you know, this is unbreakable. And, you know, months later, one of the gardeners came back and said, I broke it. I've always wondered if he, you know, went to great lengths to break it, because that's the one and only time I've known one of these tools to get broken. Some of them, as with this one, come with a little sawtooth edge, which can be useful, you know, if you're making a minor cut on something, cutting something down. And for dividing some perennials, because this is so sturdy, you know, you can get it there in the heart of a hosta or a daylily and, you know, shove it in, you know, delicate surgery and pry it apart. So this is another tool I would never be without, and they're widely available nowadays. It used to be you had to search out one of the wooden-handled Japanese hori-hori knives, but now, many companies make their own version of this. And those are the favorite tools I've chosen to talk about today. Well, and Abby was talking about the gloves. These actually aren't nitrile gloves, but the nitrile gloves are really wonderful because before they existed, if I wanted to wear gloves to protect my hands, they were usually leather gloves, and they're rather clumsy, and I couldn't weed with leather gloves. But the nitrile gloves are almost like not having gloves on at all, because they're so lightweight and they're so flexible. In cold weather, I can weed with them on. I generally don't wear gloves for weeding in the summer, but in the winter, I need to protect my fingertips from drying out digging in clay soil. So the nitrile gloves and similar gloves are really great additions to a gardener's armor nowadays.
Well, we had some questions, Doug, about some brands, and I believe your weed knife, since it was orange, is A.M. Leonard.
Yeah.
Okay, and your folding saw, was that Corona like Breeze?
I don't remember. I don't have a favorite brand. No, it's a Felco.
Oh, that's a Felco? Okay. And your pruners were Felco. They're number 2 probably?
Yeah, this was my Christmas present to me this year.
Oh, Merry Christmas.
This is just a basic number 2, the most basic of the Felcos. And, Bree mentioned another brand that she likes because they're smaller. Well, Felcos also makes a smaller version of this. They make them for left-handed people. They make other versions with like a rolling handle for people who might have a lot of arthritis in their hands. So they're very variable.
Someone in the chat mentioned it was number 6 for the smaller-handed pruner.
Thank you. Yeah, you go in a good garden center and they might have, a dozen different variations on the Felco plant pruners. But this is a Felco pruning knife. I've used many different brands. They're very similar, most of them.
Do you have your little tiny knife? Because that's always a popular tool with you.
That's Lord. I think I hear it crying because I didn't mention it.
You're not caught without that one.
Well, yeah, it's. I almost feel naked when I don't have this pruning knife. The only time I might not take it with me is like I don't know, going out for dinner or something. Not that that's done nowadays.
Or to the airport, right?
Yes, the airport. This is a little single-bladed pocket knife with a curved blade. I use it for so many things, and I certainly use it for taking cuttings of plants and processing cuttings. I do have a sharpening steel like a butcher uses that I can sharpen it frequently to keep it good and sharp. It used to be a Swiss Army knife, but the Swiss Army knife company is now owned by Felco, so it's another Felco. You very frequently find another version of this with the straight blade. I prefer this little curved blade for taking cuttings. And Chris mentioned A.M. Leonard. A.M. Leonard is a mail order company out of Piqua, Ohio, Piqua. And they will flood your mailbox with catalogs, but I almost never use the catalog, just go on their website when I need to order something, because if you don't find a tool in a garden center, you can find almost any tool in their catalog. I'm going to just I'll step right here. Now, in a much earlier century, in a plant propagation class, we were required to purchase one of these knives. And I've owned, this is not the same, half-century old knife. I've mulched many gardens with these, so constantly buying new ones. But the way we were taught to use it, it's a little bit like learning how to use chopsticks. you know, it doesn't come naturally at first, but the more you practice, it becomes second nature. And I still have 5 fingers on each hand. And the thumb and the blade maintain a constant, distance from each other, and that's permanent. And it's not the knife or this thumb that are moving. This is the hand that's moving, and this is rather woody there, and my knife's not very sharpened. But this hand is pulling the stem against the blade, and so the relationship between the thumb and the knife blade stay the same, and this thumb remains intact. So that's the way to use this knife safely. And if I was going to stick these cuttings, I'd be paying more attention of exactly where I'm cutting and stuff like that. But that's just demonstrating that technique. But I love the knife because it's so compact, and I might not have my pruning shears on me, but the knife is always there, and it'll serve many of the other purposes the knife might serve. I was cutting some plastic sheeting a little while ago to cover one end of our poly houses before this weekend's cold.
So you just mentioned a topic over there, Doug, that I'm surprised no one's talking about in the chat, but I'll bring it up anyways. You mentioned sharpening of the tools, that your tool wasn't, or your knife wasn't very sharp. From past classes, there is someone down at the North Carolina Farmers Market that sharpens tools, and I believe it's Ace Hardware often sharpens tools as well.
Yeah.
Luckily, I have a father that sharpens tools, so my source is rather local and easy to convince to sharpen the tools. And that kind of brings up another topic. Marilyn was asking about replacement parts. She's always missing her spring for her Felcos. So a good garden center that has the 6+ different models of Felco pruners should have all the variety of parts, the springs, the blades.
Yes.
But that's one thing that's very nice for the Felco pruners. And I'm guessing for Breeze pruners as well, is a lot of the parts are replaceable. So if something pops off and becomes missing, or if your blades are just 3 decades old and you've been cutting wires with them and they're no longer sharpenable, you can replace the blade. You don't need to buy the whole entire set again. So it's an investment. They can be rather expensive, but they're usually worth the price. My pruners are quite likely date back to 1993 or 1994 at the latest. So that was a good number of decades ago. They're approaching 30 years old right now.
Yeah.
And I have 2, and I've had those 2 the entire time, and I think I'm still on the original blades, but I don't work in public horticulture outside where I'm pruning something every day. These are just my home sets, but well worth the purchase. But I did use them at a garden center for almost 10 years, so there was some outdoor use. And
indeed, Chris is right. When I went shopping for these, it was at a local garden center here in Raleigh at Logan's Garden Center. They not only had a dozen different models of Felco pruners, they did have the separate parts. You can buy the replacement blade or the replacement spring, and occasionally the spring will just liberate itself and you never find it again. So it's good you can go out and buy a new one.
So show them the name that you have printed on the pruner, because I think that's an important thing, especially when you bring your pruners here to workshops.
Well, yeah, I wrote my last name on the handles because these all look very, very similar.
Yes.
And, I haven't loaned it to anybody since this morning. But I wanted to make sure I got back my almost brand new pruning shears and not some other, similar model that has a lot of wear and tear on it.
It's always fun in the workshops finding the owner of the lost pair of Felco pruners when half the people brought them in. I had a friend from quite a while ago, back in the garden center days, that used to paint or write on his tools "stolen from."
Love
his
it.
Name.
Love it.
If you just put your name on it, no one's going to say anything. But if it says "stolen from," I always thought that was rather funny. And he said it was very successful. He always got his tools back.
And some people take I guess it's a Dremel, and engrave their name in part of the metal,
You can definitely
which is
do
more
that, 'cause
permanent.
The Sharpie will eventually fade, but mine usually lasts for a year or two when I write on the pruners. Well, I wanted to bring my tools, but in my dash to get here today, I left them at home, so I apologize for that. But someone asked about a shovel recommendation. My favorite shovel at home, and some people might laugh, is my lady spade. It's not big, it's not too small, it's just a really good size. What you dig is fairly lightweight. And I use that tool so much that I wore the original one out, and we're already on number 2 for that one. But we actually wore the metal, and but I've dug 3,000 gallon ponds with that lady spade. So you can do some pretty good digging with a lady spade. But that's one of my favorite tools at home. And surprisingly, another one was a gator. I think it's called, it's either a gator or an alligator, not the vehicle, but it's kind of a chainsaw in a scissor-like thing. And I go to town on so many plants. It's good for a lot of the shrubs you need to cut back and get rid of, or I cut my lantanas back with that one every year. But it's a plug-in device that has a chainsaw blade on it, and it's protected in a cover. And
Okay.
I do stuff with that one every single year. It's one of my absolute favorites. I think that one's great. So those are my 2 favorite tools, lady spade and the gator. I think it's either alligator or gator. So sorry about that one. I'll try to look it up and put it in the chat in a little bit. How about our wonderful video helpers? Anyone have a special tool that they want to add? They're being silent. I think they like all the same tools that we did here today. So is that out of your wonderful tools today,
Yeah.
Mark?
Yeah.
Doug, excuse me.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that sounds like it for over here at the J.C. Ralston Arboretum. We're so happy that you could have us here. And I just noticed that Lori, yes, Lori, that was a lady spade, L-A-D-Y, spade, S-P-A-D-E. One of our video helpers is kind of smiling. But it's a great shovel. I think it's only about that big. We have some that are huge, and you're digging and you eventually poop yourself out with those. But the lady spade, I can keep on going for hours and hours and hours with that thing. I think it's a fantastic tool. I love that one to death.
There's probably some more politically correct,
They're probably
name for one of those now than a differently abled spade or something.
We'll check on Amazon
Yeah.
for that new name for later
Yeah.
on. But thank you so much for joining us, everyone. We're glad you could be here today to learn about some of our favorite garden tools. Hope you can join us online in the very near future. Of course, Garden Soils class this coming Saturday. And then, of course, next week, midweek program, again with Doug, talking about propagating plants with some hardwood cuttings. So thanks for joining us today. We'll see you all later. Have a great day, and stay safe in the wonderful snow coming up real soon. Bye, everyone.